Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Louis. According to the latest census figures, there are approximately 3.87 million people of Hispanic or Latino origin living in New York State. They constitute about 19 to 20% of the state's total population, and the majority of this population, which is about 2.5 million, live in New York City, making up 28 or 29% of the city's population. And yet, New York has never elected a Latino to a statewide office or a citywide office. Joining me to talk about why that is and what to do about it, and many related questions, we've got Eliezer Valentine. He is a scholar and activist, a top-notch analyst, a political advisor, and an ordained minister. And more importantly, he is the author of a brand new book called Politicking in the Barrio, Essays on Latino Politics in New York, published by With and Stock. Welcome, Eli. Great to talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Errol.
Absolutely. So now, according to these figures, the problem, the question on the table is this lack of representation and power, and you've been wrestling with this question for many, many years. What's the short answer? Why? What's going on here?
I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that we don't have things together, Latinos. I mean, there's been a lot of intra-Latino squabbling for many years, even when Puerto Ricans were the predominant group among Latinos. And now there's much more diversity, as you know. Puerto Ricans are not the top in the city, the top group, although they remain the top in the state. But we have Dominicans, Ecuadorians, Colombians, and it's I think much more difficult to really rally around one person that can be seen as a citywide, statewide person. And so I think that's part of it. The other part, I think, is just there's a lack of respect and a lack of recognition on the part of our political parties, and in this case, especially the state Democratic Party, that, I think Latinos have been taken for granted, both political leadership as well as the Latino electorate. Very interesting. So we should be clear, this lack of representation has real world repercussions. You talk about this in the book. The extreme poverty in certain portions of, say, the Bronx. Right. This is real. Like the lack of representation, okay, well, maybe you don't see somebody who looks like you, and that's a shame. But what it also translates into policies that are not working to the benefit of the larger community. Oh, absolutely. And I always believe that, proper representation is essential because it gives, I think, an understanding that others may not have on the plight of those that suffer. Communities should be, I think, represented by those that understand what is going on the ground. And most of the time, that means having people that look like them. Sure. There's an element to all of this, and you touch on a lot of this in your essays. This is really a series of essays, yes. Many of which you had published in Gotham Gazette. I've been a faithful reader for many years, so I was glad to see a lot of this stuff. Thanks. But when you can't separate these questions from the actual people on the ground, the politicians, the strategists, the donors, the volunteers, the people who work in the campaigns. And one of the sort of a secondary mystery to me is I think about strategists like you, like Luis Miranda, who I've had on this podcast, like Roberto Ramirez. Those guys are really, really sharp. J.C. Polanco, another guy, very, very sharp. We're on the Republican side mostly. And yet they haven't been able to pull this off. Why is that? Because these guys are really sharp, like second to none. Very, very good at what they do. Very, very good. Yeah. We remember Freddy Ferrer. He was a project of a lot of these guys. Yes. Right. Yes. And the only Latino to win the nomination of a major party for the mayoralty here in New York. And we know that he faced an uphill battle with a Bloomberg that spent over $100 million to win re-election. But even before that, 2001, we know how contentious that primary was with Mark Green. So here's the thing: although Latinos and this was, I think, an issue for Miranda and company then, as it is now, that although Latinos comprise almost a third of New York City, the thing is that any Latino candidate, or in fact any candidate, cannot win without a broad coalition. Mm-hmm. So Latinos have always had to, in the case of Ferrer, in the case of Badillo before him, they've always had to rely on making the proper coalitions to get over the top. And sometimes that gets really messy, as we saw with Badillo, right? So I think there are a lot of complications and a lot of dynamics that have lended to, I think, a lack of proper representation at the top levels, and even really more than representation, a candidate that is really legitimate in terms of being able to raise the money, put the proper infrastructure in place. So I think all of that is factored into the fact that, we are here today with no Latino or Latina, right, at the city and state level.
Herman Badillo, say a word about him. He's an extraordinary figure. I only got to talk to him a couple of times. I've gotten to know his widow a little bit better. But a fascinating guy, right? I mean, talented like you can't believe. First Puerto Rican congressman, and it is in a restless search for throughout most of his career to sort of find the right home and the right opportunity. Walks out of Congress, which is kind of hard to believe, in order to become a deputy mayor. That's how important the job used to be, and ends up leaving that job and finds his way into alliances with Republicans and never quite recovers, never wins office again.
Yeah, Badillo is an interesting story. I'm going to say a little bit more about Badillo in my next book, but really interesting story. He starts as a reformer. Back when, in the days when everything boiled down to either being part of the establishment or you were on the reformist wing of the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So Badillo was very much a progressive, and again on the reformist part of the party. Starts in East Harlem in El Barrio, but was very politically astute. He understood that in order to get elected, he would need to go up north, goes up to the Bronx, and has better luck up there at a time in which Puerto Ricans at the time were moving up to the Bronx and more folk were getting elected. So he starts very much a progressive, and I think, and obviously later on he's much more moderate to conservative, and one can say or wonder whether some of that was simply a reaction to a repudiation on the part of Democratic Party stalwarts, or whether it was that he saw an electoral opportunity, aligning himself with Giuliani and company. So, but certainly Badillo was a pioneer, and again, starting with his fights in East Harlem with the Italians at the time that were becoming less and less prominent as a population in East Harlem. Really fascinating stories. I mean, we're talking about Badillo having to physically fight, because they were coming after him, and the other part is that his fight was also against more establishment folk like Tony Mendez, who was the first Latino district leader to win election as a district leader, a product of the Tammany Hall faction that at the time was losing power but still had some sway in Manhattan. And Badillo had to fight Mendez, Puerto Rican on one side, and the Italians on the other side. And it was really fascinating what Badillo was able to accomplish.
So there are some myths that you talk about sort of getting away from, right? One of them, which I'm glad you spent some time on it, is this myth that there are problems with representation and advancement for the Latino community in Latino politics, but the fact that there are a lot of Cubans, Colombians, Ecuadorians, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, that's not the problem, right? I mean, it's not like there's some intra-community warfare going on for the most part.
For the most part, there's not. And that's a great thing. I think there were more there was squabbling. There was much more squabbling when Puerto Ricans were.
Right. Del Toro's versus, there are many challenges.
In the Bronx, you had Badillo, and then you had, what was his name? The big housing, his name is...
Ramon
Velez,
yes.
Right? So you had that going on. Valentin was in the middle. So I think there was much more, right, intra-Puerto Rican squabbling back then. But, it's fascinating that that's not the case, especially when we think about those on the ground. Sometimes it happens at the elite level, what I would call the elite level, between some elected officials, and I have to say, I'm Puerto Rican, but right, the truth is the truth that there were many Puerto Ricans that I think felt threatened by the rise of Dominicans at one point, and then right, South Americans in Queens and other parts. But that's less the case now. And that never translated into intra-Latino conflicts and strife on the ground. I think there has been a sort of Pan-Latino identity, but also a sort of a clear intermingling, right? That's definitely not a posture towards division or whatnot, which is really fascinating. And I have to say, the newer elected officials, they have been very, very open to coalition building among other Latinos and other ethnic groups. And so that's certainly not the case with the younger crop that definitely see the need for a strong Pan-Latino reality.
Yeah. I mean, there again, another strategist, good friend of mine, Eddie Castel.
Oh, yes.
Very, very good at sort of seeing this and kind of working it. And he's Cubano, I think, but that's not even, he's very, very top-notch strategist.
Yes, he is.
And then you have somebody, I saw in one of your essays, you make note that Nydia Velázquez, first Puerto Rican woman ever elected to Congress, is very strategic, not even strategic, but just has a Pan-Latino vision and goes about supporting somebody like Carlos Menchaca, who's Mexican-American, is really heavily favoring Antonio Reynoso as her successor, and he's Dominican.
Yeah. And Nydia has always been about coalition building. And we can see that. I mean, Diana Reina, I would have to say also, 2001, becomes the first Dominican elected official in Brooklyn. And then Antonio Reynoso comes right after. And these are all of Nydia's godchildren. And that's the way that it's been put in, in city and state. So, Nydia's certainly been very intentional about that. And I have to say, interestingly enough, Jose Rivera, when he was the party chairman, the Bronx Democratic Party leader, was very supportive of Dominican community leaders and helping Dominican leaders win elected office. He starts with Yudelka Tapia, who's now an assemblywoman, but at the time, we're talking about early 90s, he supports her for school board member, becomes the first, Dominican, and obviously, supports her later on, the first Dominican elected for a state legislative seat in 2010, Nelson Castro, who goes down after, but Jose Rivera was very supportive of him, and in fact, he was the one that pushed him to run for that seat. So we have seen a number of Puerto Rican electeds from that generation, from the previous generation, that were very supportive of up and coming Latino groups.
Sure. You know what? Since we're calling off names, I think of guys like Nelson Dennis.
Oh yeah.
I think of things.
He gave me my start, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say
Dennis.
guys like him and Adam Clayton Powell IV.
Yes.
Guys who had looks, they had verve, they had energy, charisma. And never went as far as I thought they were going to. Everybody makes their own career choices. But what do you think happened there?
Well, in the case of Nelson Dennis,
he He chased the Del Toros out of town. I mean, so that's a public service. The guys who came up before him were, shall we say, ethically challenged, right? And were always under investigation and didn't quite produce for the community, which is why they got thrown out by Nelson Dennis.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like you say, Errol, he takes on the Del Toro machine, almost beats them in 1994, but he lost by 150 votes against someone that was the chair of the Education Committee in the Assembly, has the support of all the unions. And I mean, Nelson Dennis was really a one-of-a-kind talent. And Harvard trained, Yale Law School, and really the pedigree of Supreme Court justices and whatnot. I think Nelson got distracted by other priorities, and I think it impacted his ability to really connect with the East Harlem community. And in the end, it hurt him. So he goes against Adam Clayton Powell 4 years after he wins office, and Adam beats him. And I remember Nelson telling me back then, he said, it is hard to run against someone who has an avenue and a building named after him.
Well, this is true. That is true. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., his father, a literal legend in New York politics and East Harlem politics in particular. Another myth that you talk about, the myth of defection of Latinos from the Democratic Party in recent years, in the Trump era. Run those numbers for me. What do people think happened and what really happened?
So the myth is that Latinos are defecting from the Democratic Party, or on another side of things, not voting in the same type of numbers for Democratic parties as they had in the past. That is a myth. And especially in national elections and congressional and statewide elections, Latinos still remain pretty much faithful to Democratic candidates. We have seen an average of about 60 to 64% for Democratic presidential candidates. Even with Kamala Harris, there was a decline, but it still hovers around the 60% mark. So I think there was much ado about nothing. I can't say nothing because, again, as we often say, and it's the truth, Latinos we're not a monolith, right? So, and we come from all sorts of countries, and even our language, right? There are nuances that are different across, Latino groups. That reflects itself in how some Latinos vote. So certainly, Cubans in Florida vote very different from New York, Latinos in New York, or California. So there are there are differences, but for the most part, on average, Latinos still are voting for Democratic candidates in large numbers.
So when Republicans, they did an autopsy, I remember several cycles ago, and one of the conclusions was we need to do a better outreach. We need to, not just appeal to their, throw out a couple of Spanish language ads, but we need to really sort of try and embrace them. We can compete for them. We can win them over. And then there are others, especially in the Trump era, who say, don't waste your time on that. Just, turn out your rural white Protestant base and leave these folks alone. Those folks kind of have a point, right? When they say, this is not necessarily fertile ground for trying to flip Democratic voters.
At one point, I would have said there may have been some opportunity.
There's a small regional exceptions like Southern Florida and so forth.
Exactly. But certainly now, especially after this ICE enforcement, where even some Latinos that were supportive of Trump, they're like, what did we do? What were we thinking? So I think that will definitely have an impact for years to come, even if there will be someone else at the top of the ballot that's not Trump, unless it's his son, or one of his sons. But I think the Republicans have lost an opportunity to at least try to convince some of these Latinos to come their way.
Okay. So you make note in one of your essays of the explosive growth of evangelical Christianity among Latinos. I guess you're personally part of that.
Yeah.
Is that how you were raised, or was there sort of conversion along the way?
No, I was raised a Pentecostal. My father was a Latino Pentecostal pastor in East Harlem. He served 52 years until his passing 4 years ago. Served 52 years there in East Harlem, and has a street corner named after him.
Oh, fantastic!
So yeah, we're very grateful about that. So I was raised Pentecostal and served as a pastor myself for a number of years. But with the American Baptist Churches denomination.
Yes.
But I would certainly consider myself part of the Latino evangelical tradition, but the progressive wing of the tradition.
Well, yeah, this is interesting. You and I have something in common here because you were raised Church of God in Christ, right?
Yes.
And so was my wife, by the way.
Oh,
from Florida.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I was a college activist, I was one of the co-founders with a group of friends of the William J. Seymour Society.
Oh.
And William J. Seymour, of course, is one of the
Founders of the movement.
Yeah, one of the fathers of the evangelical movement from the early 1900s out in California. It's a fascinating story. I'll have to talk about it in another episode. But it tracks with me as I read your stuff that you sort of socially conservative or personally conservative or modest, economically maybe left-leaning, theologically serious, which I guess is the point, right? Is that there's kind of an ethical and moral dimension both to your thinking and your writing.
Oh yeah. I
mean, you studied with a theologian, right?
I did.
Yeah.
James Cone, who was the father of Black theology of liberation, and that was my teacher. And I'm very influenced by the liberation theology movement, which was really centered on social justice and particularly looking at marginalized communities and the focus, as I said, on social justice. So yeah, I think at least socially, I never considered myself conservative, but certainly those that were part of the tradition are conservative socially, right? So anti-abortion, right? Anti-LGBTQ, and that was never the case with me. My father gave me a lot of leeway.
Well, you know, when in fact, it's funny when I say that, when I'm talking about myself and how we behaved on campus, I just meant not getting involved in drugs, orgies, and all the other crazy stuff that was going on campus. You know, I mean, absolutely. We were just like, no thanks.
Yes, absolutely.
No thanks. One girlfriend at a time, kind of thing. Tell me about Reinhold Niebuhr, the theologian. You cite him. He's, for my listeners, he's best known for the Serenity Prayer, which goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But that's the part that went pop. But he's a much more serious and interesting figure in a lot of ways.
Oh, so fascinating. I'm still working on a book. It's going to have to wait for another few years on his politics. But so Reinhold Niebuhr was actually one of the co-founders of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I was reading your book. I didn't realize that he was active and actually ran as a candidate, the Socialists of America.
Yeah. He was part of Socialists of America, ran for state senate in the late 20s, ran for Congress in the early 30s, didn't do well. So he was a socialist until the FDR era. And FDR, so Niebuhr felt that FDR was able to accomplish a lot of the things that socialists were fighting for. So he leaves the Socialist Party in part that, but then there were other things in terms of foreign policy matters that were important to him. But Niebuhr was really important to me because through Niebuhr I found a model in which to merge my two passions, theology and politics. And I figured, hey, if Niebuhr could do it, I can as well.
Sure.
So as you say, especially as I analyze and partake in the political process, there is certainly always there's a moral component in the sense that for me, what drives me and what I feel should drive any political work is justice and is the uplifting of communities, especially those that are marginalized and pushed to the side.
It almost seems quaint, or it's not part of the central conversation. I mean, you go back and read speeches from back then, and people are talking about helping their fellow man and so forth, and sometimes in explicitly moral terms, sometimes not. But that's kind of the general thrust of public policy. A lot of that stuff is contested now. A lot of that's, a lot of times you have to argue with people. That's like, we probably shouldn't leave people to die on the street, right? In the richest city in the world. And that's seen as like, oh, well, what are you, some kind of communist? I mean, the Mamdani campaign, among other things, it wasn't, people got hung up on the idea that he's a democratic socialist, but substantively, I didn't find anything that was fundamentally different from what a New Deal Democrat would be calling.
Oh, yeah. And I would say even scholars in the field that study socialism, like someone like Gary Dorian, for instance, would agree with you that's not the for the most part, the democratic socialist philosophy today is, it's more in line with New Deal Democrats and what some would call more economic democracy than a full through and through socialism. And I would say that I think I'm surprised, especially with Christians, that they have some issues with some of the positions taken by Mamdani and others, because I think that the gospel that Christianity proclaims and teaches, it has socialist sensibilities to it. I mean, we're talking about, give everything that you have.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Give it all. Feed the poor, right? Take care of widows. And someone today would say, that's socialism. But hey, I mean, I think that's what Christianity stands for.
I mean, they're right. There are these complaints about, free health care and so forth and so on. And as you know, the Bible has Jesus talking more about healing than almost anything else.
Yes, that's right.
Right? That's right. I mean, like, it was, back then, of course, it was a very serious thing. Very interesting. Let's look ahead to the midterms and, more importantly, the 2028 presidential elections. What do you see happening for the Latino community? Who will be a candidate that they would gravitate toward, and on what issues and for what reasons?
That's a great question. I think there is the start of a bench. I would start there, especially for a national election. I think of Ruben Gallego in Arizona, right, Senator of Arizona. He's one that I think is one to watch when we speak about presidential elections. And I think he's positioning himself to be one, both ideologically and also with legislation. And also look out for AOC. I mean, I think about AOC. There is no other Latino, Latina that is as widely known as AOC.
Correct.
Whether you love her or hate her.
Right.
But the fact is that she is known. And there's never been a Latino or Latina that has had that type of prominence. And I think she's going to be one to watch. And I wonder if Mamdani is successful in governing the largest city in the country, how that would impact a potential AOC, even a presidency candidacy, or maybe a Senate candidacy if she decides to do that. So in other words, would he open the door for some to say, hey, they label themselves socialist because that's obviously the four-letter word for many conservatives and even moderates, but right, the homeless are being taken care of. Right, the economy is being taken care of. The budget is being passed. I mean, yes, there are laws that we have to in the city abide by. That we cannot go over budget. We have to have a balanced budget. But in either case, if Mamdani accomplishes this, what would that mean for an AOC? Or other socialist candidates that aspire to higher office? I think it could have an interesting effect.
Very interesting. There were a number of Latina candidates in particular who modeled themselves on her and tried to follow in her footsteps. And this is what politicians do, right? You try and start using the three initials, JGR, and some of these other people. And she actually endorsed, I remember she endorsed Julia Salazar fairly early on. Her blessing, when bestowed on the right candidate in the right district, can really make a big difference, obviously. Is she a one-off, though? Are we going to see more like her?
Potentially, we can see more like her. I think she is unique, right? There's a talent there that is unique to her. The same way Mamdani, I think, these are generational talents that they don't come, they don't come around very often. That's why they call generational talents, right? But I think there is potential for others to I guess, have some type of prominence in the way that AOC has had. Again, maybe not to that level, but I think there's potential. There's more of a bench now, I think, than there was some years ago. And I think that's a good thing, especially if these electeds and others that are involved politically are intentional about forming the new generation and really building a bench instead of holding on to power.
Well, give some broad advice, I guess, to the class of Latino operatives, strategists, donors, and especially candidates. What in New York? What aren't they doing that they should be doing?
Well, I think for one is that there needs to be an intentional effort to, one, build coalitions, right? To see the necessity that coalition building is important in order to get anything done, right? And I think some within the newer crop are figuring that part out, right?
Well, whatever happened to the Black Latino Coalition? I mean, it got David Dinkins elected. The architect and mastermind behind that, Bill Lynch, was a friend and mentor of mine, and he worked on it literally every day up until the day he died. I haven't seen many people try and sort of pick that up and rebuild that coalition.
Yeah, and I think much to it's unfortunate for both communities, I think. I always wondered, imagine if Black and brown folk would really get together. I mean, just numbers-wise, I mean, a powerhouse, right? Sure. The overwhelming majority of the population is Black and brown. So I think part of it is that, and certainly I would speak about Latino electeds and Latino political leaders that really sought power for themselves. And many, and this was, I think, always a challenge, many saw Black folk as impediments to getting their piece of the pie, right? And what Bill Lynch and others successfully did in '89, by the way, it was attempted with Badillo in the mid-'70s, right? Sure. And by the way, Carl McCall was, in the late '60s, was part of that coalition that was really behind Badillo and helped them establish relationships with black neighborhoods and Black leaders. But that's kind of lost. And I think, again, perhaps from both sides, but I say on the Latino side, they fail to see Black folk as real partners, and both communities sharing similar struggles, and seeing the potential of seeing that as something that could bring us together. And the other thing I would say, Errol, is it's unfortunate, especially when we realize that for many Latinos, not all, we have Blacks in our family.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
My grandmother was an Afro-Boricua woman.
Of course.
From slave ancestry.
Sure.
So I mean, it's in the blood, right?
Yeah.
And I think the newer crop sees that reality and understands that reality. How that turns into real coalition building, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, no, it's a source of great frustration for me. My parents are from El Barrio. They grew up in
I didn't know that.
East 118th Street, thereabouts. Wow. And, I wasn't, by the time I came along, they were in West Harlem. But it was always it was just one community, right? Yes. So my mother's best friend, my comadre, my godmother, Milagros, my Aunt Millie.
Wow.
And it was just I don't know, what I remember from living in the Manhattanville projects was there were a lot of Black folk and some of them spoke Spanish. You know what I mean? Yeah. The Matoses, we call them the Matoses. The Matos family are good friends, and
family.
family. I even remember, I'll tell you this, 30 years ago when I used to go up to the Black and Puerto Rican caucus up in Albany each year, it was clearly a coalition effort. Meaning, if the chair was Black, then the dinner chair that year was Latino. Like they literally specifically divided it up. And then a few years later, I start seeing Somos El Futuro, and now it's not quite so Black and Puerto Rican, and now it's this and it's that, and they invite in the Asians, but now the Latinos are off doing their thing in Puerto Rico for the Somos.
Right.
And a lot of the conversation about coalition, as well as the, specific efforts of people like a Charles Rangel, who's like Afro-Latino,
right,
and trying to make it work,
right,
it all just kind of falls apart. So much of it just comes back to what do specific players want to do as far as strategy to help build power for their communities and make life better for the people that they're leading.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would dare say Latino empowerment will not come unless there are real coalition partners, right, in the struggle and in the quest for empowerment. And our natural partners are our Black brothers and sisters.
You know who's the person who should put this together, who could probably put it together, is Mamdani. Because he's going to need to. His reelection will be here before you know it. And like many other people, he was elected in some ways by a fluke. And he sort of put together he cobbled together this coalition of mostly young people who were just sick of the status quo.
Right.
That's a great trick, but that only works once. Now you are the status quo. Now you have to think a little bit more broadly about what happens, right?
Well, I hope he's listening to this podcast.
Well, when I see him, I'll remind him to take a listen, or some of his strategists. Listen, great talking with you. Politicking in the Barrio. Lots and lots of insight about lots and lots of stuff. Congratulations. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Harold.
Okay. If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.